The man had no wallet, no phone, no ID, just a jagged scar running from his left shoulder to his sternum, a scar that made trauma nurse Elena Vasquez stop breathing. She'd seen that exact wound pattern before, not in a textbook, not in medical training, in a classified Pentagon briefing she was never supposed to attend. 2004, Operation Phantom Strike, a mission that officially never happened. The surgeon laughed when Eleanor tried to warn him. "You're a nurse. Stay in your lane." 12 minutes later, the patient flatlined, and a security team from an agency that doesn't exist surrounded the hospital. What Elena did next would expose a conspiracy 20 years in the making, and destroy everything she thought she knew about herself. St. Michael's Trauma Center, Chicago, 2:47 a.m. The ambulance bay doors slammed open. John Doe, approximately 45 years old, found unresponsive under the Wabash Avenue Bridge. No ID, no belongings, severe hypothermia, possible internal bleeding, multiple contusions, GCS of 6 on scene. Elena Vasquez barely looked up from her station. Another homeless patient. Another night of bureaucratic paperwork and sympathetic glances from attending physicians who would forget the man's face by morning. 14 years she'd worked the night shift at St. Michael's. 14 years of trauma codes and flatlines, and the particular kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones like concrete. She was 41. Her back ached. Her marriage had ended 3 years ago. Her daughter was in college now, calling once a week if Eleanor was lucky. This was her life. This was all her life would ever be. "Vasquez, you're on this one." Dr. Nathan Cole didn't wait for her response. He was already moving toward the trauma bay, already snapping orders at the residents trailing behind him like nervous ducklings. Cole was 32, Harvard Medical School, chief surgical resident with a God complex the size of Lake Michigan. He'd been at St. Michael's for 8 months, and in that time, Elena had watched him dismiss more experienced nurses, override attending physicians, and generally act like the hospital existed solely to witness his brilliance. She followed. She always followed. The patient lay on the gurney, stripped of wet clothing, warming blankets already being applied. Middle-aged, weathered face, the kind of deep-set exhaustion that suggested years of hard living. Just another John Doe. Until Eleanor saw the scar. Her hands stopped moving. The clipboard in her grip trembled. The scar ran from the patient's left shoulder, across his clavicle, down through the pectoral muscle, ending just above the sternum. It was old, maybe 20 years, silvered with time. But the pattern was unmistakable. 3 parallel incisions, surgical precision, the kind of controlled damage that came from one thing and one thing only: field extraction of embedded shrapnel from a proximity detonation. Elena had seen that wound pattern exactly once before. In a room she was never supposed to enter. In a briefing she was never supposed to witness. 20 years ago, in a life she had spent every day since trying to forget. "Nurse Vasquez, Nurse Vasquez." Cole's voice snapped through her paralysis. His vitals, now. Elena's hands moved, automatic, professional, even as her mind screamed that this was impossible. Blood pressure 62/40, heart rate 134, temperature 89.6. He's in severe hypothermic shock with signs of internal hemorrhage. "Obvious assessment. Get him typed and crossed. We're going to need—" "Dr. Cole!" The words left her mouth before she could stop them. "This scar. It's a tactical surgical pattern, field medicine. He's not just a homeless man. We need to run—" Cole's laugh cut through the trauma bay like a scalpel. "A tactical surgical pattern?" He turned to the residents, eyebrows raised. Did you hear that? Our nurse thinks she's a forensic expert now. The residents shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a young woman Elena had helped train just 6 months ago, looked away. Vasquez. Cole's voice dropped. You're a nurse. Your job is to hand me instruments and follow my orders, not to play detective with scar tissue. Are we clear? Elena's jaw tightened. You don't understand. You can't understand. Because you've never been in a room where they discuss the men who don't exist, the operations that never happened, the bodies that were never recovered. But she said nothing. She handed him the instruments. She followed orders, just like she always did. The surgery took 4 hours. Cole removed a ruptured spleen, repaired a lacerated liver, and closed the patient with the kind of theatrical flourish that suggested he expected applause. Textbook work, he announced to the gallery. He'll be in recovery by morning. Elena said nothing. She watched the patient's face, the deep lines around his eyes, the particular way his hands, even unconscious, seemed to curl as if reaching for something that wasn't there. She knew those hands, not personally, but she knew the type, the way soldiers' hands move even in sleep, the way their fingers twitch toward weapons that aren't there. At 7:15 a.m., the day shift arrived. Elena should have gone home, should have collapsed into her empty apartment and slept until her alarm dragged her back for another night. Instead, she sat in the break room, staring at her phone. The number she'd deleted 15 years ago. The number she'd sworn never to call. Ring. 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 This line is not in service. She tried again. This line is not in service. Again. This line is not in service. Of course, they had deactivated it. After what she'd done, after she'd walked away, why would they leave any door open? Elena! She nearly dropped the phone. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the doorway. The hospital's trauma attending, 53 years old. Grey hair she'd stopped dyeing years ago. The only physician at St. Michael's who still called Eleanor by her first name. You look like you've seen a ghost. Elena forced a smile. Long night. Cole gave you trouble again. Cole is Cole. Chen sat down across from her. You know, I've watched you work for 8 years. I've seen you catch diagnoses that residents miss. I've seen you stabilize patients who should have been dead on arrival. And every single time, you step back and let someone else take credit. That's not... Why did you leave the military, Elena? The question hit like a bullet. I was never in the... Your patient, the John Doe. Chen's voice was gentle. I looked at his chart, the scars, the muscle development, the particular calluses on his hands. She paused. I served 12 years in the Navy Medical Corps. I know what combat veterans look like, and I know what combat medics look like. Elena said nothing. You recognized that scar pattern, didn't you? That's why Cole got defensive, because you saw something he couldn't see. Silence. Chen stood. The patient's in recovery, room 412. He's been asking for you. Asking for me? He's barely conscious. He woke up 20 minutes ago, asked for the nurse with steady hands, said he knew you'd come. Chen walked away. Elena sat frozen. He knew you'd come. How could he know? How could anyone know? Room 412. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The patient lay propped against pillows, IVs running into both arms. His eyes were open, clear. The confusion of hypothermia and blood loss had faded, replaced by something sharper. Recognition. Close the door, he said. Elena hesitated. Please. She closed the door. You're Elena Vasquez. His voice was rough, damaged by cold and time. Formerly Chief Petty Officer Elena Vasquez, combat medic, SEAL Team 6 Support Unit, Operation Phantom Strike, Kandahar Province, October 2004. The world tilted. How do you... Because I was there. He shifted, wincing against the fresh surgical wounds. I was the one they pulled out of that building, the one with the shrapnel in my chest, the one whose heart stopped 3 times on the medevac. Elena's legs gave way. She caught herself against the wall. That's impossible. Everyone on that team, everyone who survived the extraction, they're all dead? A bitter smile. Officially, yes. That's what the file says. That's what they need the file to say. Who are you? My name was Marcus Webb, Sergeant First Class, Delta Force, but I haven't been Marcus Webb in 20 years. He coughed, blood speckling his lips. The people who did this to me, who left me under that bridge, they've been hunting the survivors of Phantom Strike for 2 decades. One by one, we've been disappearing. Accidents, suicides, overdoses. He looked at her. You're the last one, Elena. The last person who knows what really happened that night. I was just a medic. I didn't see anything. I was in the field hospital when... You were in the briefing room, October 12th, 2004. You walked in looking for Colonel Harrison, and you heard everything. Elena's blood ran cold. The prototype, the weapon system, the reason they sent us into that compound. Webb's eyes burned. You know, Elena, you've always known. That's why you disappeared. That's why you've been hiding in a trauma center in Chicago for 14 years. Her hands were shaking. What do you want from me? The file you copied. The one you took from Harrison's desk before you went AWOL. The evidence that proves Phantom Strike wasn't an extraction mission. I don't have any. It was an assassination. Our own government sent us to kill American scientists who were about to blow the whistle on an illegal weapons program. And when the mission went sideways, they buried everyone who knew, soldiers, scientists, command officers. Webb grabbed her wrist. Everyone except you. The monitors screamed. Webb's vitals crashed without warning. Heart rate spiking to 190. Blood pressure plummeting. The surgical site bleeding through fresh bandages. Elena moved before she could think. Code Blue, room 412. Code Blue, room 412. She ripped open the crash cart, grabbed the paddles, started chest compressions with the kind of mechanical precision that comes from doing something 1,000 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The door burst open. Residents flooded in, then nurses, then Cole, his face a mask of irritation. What happened? Post-surgical hemorrhage, possible cardiac tamponade. Elena's hands never stopped moving. He needs to go back to the OR now. I'll make that determination, Vasquez. He has blood pooling around his heart. If we don't... I said I'll make that determination. Cole pushed her aside, began his own examination, wasted 30 precious seconds confirming what Elena already knew. Get him to OR2. Move. They moved. Elena tried to follow. Vasquez, stay here. He needs a surgeon, not a middle-aged nurse with delusions of grandeur. Cole's voice dripped contempt. You've been hovering over this patient all night. It's unprofessional. It's obsessive. And frankly, it's pathetic. The words hung in the air. The residents looked away. The door swung shut. Elena stood alone in the empty room, Webb's blood still warm on her hands. Pathetic, unprofessional, just a nurse. 20 years of hiding. 20 years of pretending to be ordinary. 20 years of watching doctors make mistakes she could have prevented. Watching patients die from complications she saw coming. Watching her skills atrophy in the name of staying invisible. And now a man was dying. A man who knew the truth. A man who might be the only witness left to a conspiracy that had already claimed dozens of lives. She looked at her hands. Still steady. After everything, the war, the trauma, the secrets, the guilt, Her hands were still steady. Elena walked toward the OR. OR2 was chaos. Webb was crashing on the table. Blood everywhere. Cole was shouting orders that contradicted each other. The residents were frozen with fear. "He's in V-fib! I can see that! Charge to 200! We need to open him up. The bleeding is—" "I know what the bleeding is!" Elena pushed through the door. "You need to stop." Cole spun. "Get her out of here." "You're missing the secondary hemorrhage. The liver repair is holding, but the intercostal vessels are compromised. You're shocking a heart that isn't getting enough blood to function." "I don't care what you think you—" "I've done this procedure 47 times. Elena's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Not in a hospital, in field conditions, under fire, with nothing but a combat medic kit and a prayer." The room went silent. "I was SEAL Team 6 support. I've performed emergency thoracotomies in the back of helicopters. I've clamped arteries with my bare hands, while mortars landed 50 meters away. I've kept men alive who had no business surviving." She stepped toward the table. "This man is going to die in the next 3 minutes unless someone clamps the intercostal bleed. You can do it, Dr. Cole, or I can. But someone needs to do it now." Cole's face was white. You're a combat medic." "I was, for 12 years, until I walked away from everything and everyone I knew because I couldn't live with what I'd seen." She looked at Webb's chest, the blood, the failing heart. "But I'm done hiding." Cole didn't move. The monitors screamed. 160, 140, 120. "Dr. Cole." He stepped back. "Do it." Elena's hands moved. Scalpel, rib spreader, direct visualization of the chest cavity. There, the intercostal vessels, torn by the original trauma, reopened by the stress of surgery. "Clamp," she clamped. "Suture kit," she sutured. "Retractor out. Close him up." In 4 minutes and 37 seconds, Elena Vasquez did what no one else in that room could have done. She saved Marcus Webb's life. Again. The aftermath was chaos of a different kind. Cole retreated to his office. The residents stared at Elena like she'd grown a second head. The attending physicians gathered in clusters, whispering in the kind of urgent tones that meant someone's career was about to be examined very closely. But Eleanor didn't care about any of that. Because at 9:47 a.m., 3 men in dark suits walked through the main entrance of St. Michael's Trauma Center. They didn't check in at reception. They didn't ask for directions. They walked directly to the ICU, badges flashing credentials that made security personnel step aside without question. Elena saw them from the nursing station. Her blood turned to ice. She knew those badges. She knew that walk. She knew the particular way men moved when they were trained to kill and authorized to do so. Defense Intelligence Agency. The same agency that had classified Operation Phantom Strike. The same agency that had made Marcus Webb and everyone like him disappear. The same agency that had spent 20 years hunting survivors. And now they were here. For her. Eleanor moved. Fast. Quiet, the way she'd been trained to move in another life. She slipped into the supply closet, grabbed her phone, dialed the one number she'd memorized but never saved. 3 rings. "St. Michael's Trauma Center. How may I direct your call?" "Get me Dr. Sarah Chen. Now, tell her it's about the patient in 412. 45 seconds later, Chen's voice. "Elena, what's—" "Listen to me. There are 3 men from a federal agency heading to the ICU. They're here for the John Doe. And they're here for me." "Elena, what are you talking about?" 20 years ago, I witnessed something I shouldn't have. I've been hiding ever since, but they found me. And if they take Webb, he'll disappear, just like everyone else." Silence on the line. "What do you need me to do?" "Buy me time. 10 minutes. Tell them there's a complication with the patient. Tell them anything. And what are you going to do? Elena closed her eyes. What I should have done 20 years ago. The service elevator, the basement corridors, the maintenance tunnels that connected St. Michael's to the parking structure next door. Elena moved through the hospital's hidden arteries like a ghost. Every turn, every door, every security camera. She'd mapped them all years ago, just in case this day ever came. She reached the ICU through the back entrance. The DIA agents were at the nursing station, their voices low and urgent. Chen was there, talking animatedly about complications and medical protocols, and the impossibility of moving a patient in critical condition. God bless Sarah Chen. Elena slipped into room 412. Webb was conscious, barely. His eyes tracked her movement with the kind of awareness that suggested he'd been expecting her. They're here, he whispered. I know. You need to run. Forget about me. Get the file. Get it to someone who can... I'm not leaving you. She disconnected his monitors one by one, silenced the alarms with codes she wasn't supposed to know, began preparing him for transport. This is insane. I can barely walk. You don't need to walk. You just need to stay alive for the next 20 minutes. And then what? Elena looked at him. Then we end this, all of it, everything they've been hiding for 20 years. Webb studied her face. The file, you still have it. It's in a safe deposit box in Milwaukee, under a name that doesn't exist anymore. I've been paying the fees for 2 decades, waiting for this day. Why? Why didn't you just destroy it? Elena helped him into a wheelchair, covered him with blankets, made him look like just another patient being transferred. Because I made a promise. To the men who died that night, to the scientists they murdered, to everyone who ever trusted our government to do the right thing. She wheeled him toward the service corridor. I promised that someday the truth would come out. They almost made it. The service corridor was clear. The elevator was waiting. The car was parked 3 levels down, keys already in the ignition. And then the stairwell door opened. Dr. Nathan Cole. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. But in his grip was a hospital security radio already keyed to broadcast. Going somewhere, Vasquez. Elena stopped. Dr. Cole, this isn't what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you're kidnapping a patient. It looks like you're fleeing federal agents. It looks like everything you've told me is a lie. I know how this seems. You were a combat medic for 12 years, Cole's voice cracked. You've been working as a floor nurse at my hospital while I treated you like... He couldn't finish. You need to let us go, Nathan. Why? So you can run? So you can disappear again? He raised the radio. Give me one reason. One real reason why I shouldn't call this in right now. Elena met his eyes. Because 20 years ago, the United States government ordered the assassination of American citizens to cover up an illegal weapons program. Because every witness has been systematically murdered. Because the men in your ICU right now aren't here to arrest anyone. They're here to make sure the last 2 people who know the truth never talk. Cole's hand trembled. That's a conspiracy theory. That's insane. Is it? Webb spoke from the wheelchair, his voice weak but clear. I spent 18 years in Delta Force. I've seen what happens when powerful people need problems to disappear. The official story is always clean. The reality is always blood. Elena stepped closer to Cole. You're a good surgeon, Nathan. Better than you know. But you've spent your whole career believing that the system works, that the rules make sense, that if you just follow protocols, everything turns out right. She put her hand on the radio. The system doesn't work. Not for people like us. Not for the men and women who saw too much, knew too much, couldn't stay quiet. The only thing that's ever protected me is staying invisible, and now that's over. Cole looked at her, at Webb, at the radio in his hand. They'll destroy my career. They'll do worse if you help them. Long silence. Cole lowered the radio. The parking garage, level B3. There's a loading dock that bypasses the main exits. Security doesn't monitor it after 10 a.m. Elena stared at him. Why? Because you were right. In the OR, you were right about everything, and I was too arrogant to listen. He stepped aside. Maybe it's time I started. They made it to the car. Elena drove. Fast, professional. The way she'd learned in evasive driving courses a lifetime ago. Webb slumped in the passenger seat, one hand pressed against his surgical wounds. They'll have the highways monitored, airport, train station, bus depot. I know. So where are we going? Somewhere they won't think to look. Milwaukee was a 3-hour drive. Elena took back roads, changed directions randomly, used techniques she'd learned for counter-surveillance that she'd hoped never to use again. At 2:15 p.m., they reached the First National Bank of Milwaukee. The safe deposit box was in the basement, number 847, rented under the name Maria Santos, an identity Elena had created in 2005 and maintained ever since. The box contained one item, a flash drive. That's it? Webb stared at the small device. 20 years of hiding, and it's just that? This drive contains the complete operational file for Phantom Strike. Mission objectives, authorized targets, communications between the Pentagon and the contractors who developed the weapon system. Elena held it like it might explode. It proves that American soldiers were ordered to assassinate American scientists. It proves that the official story, that we were extracting hostages, was a fabrication. It proves that everyone who died that night was murdered by their own government. Webb was quiet for a long moment. And what do we do with it? Elena looked at him. We make sure the world sees it. The Chicago Tribune building, 6:45 p.m. Elena had called ahead. An old contact from her military days, a journalist named Rachel Torres, who had spent the last decade investigating military cover-ups. Torres met them in the parking garage. Elena Vasquez, I never thought I'd hear from you again. Neither did I. And this is the witness, the last survivor? Webb nodded, still pale from blood loss and the stress of the day. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, officially dead since 2005. Torres examined the flash drive. Her eyes widened. This is everything. Names, dates, authorization codes. If this is authentic, it's authentic. Then this is the biggest military scandal since Miley. Elena felt something shift in her chest. 20 years of weight, 20 years of guilt, 20 years of watching shadows and waiting for the knock on the door. Publish it, all of it, before they can stop you. Torres nodded. I'll need verification, independent analysis, legal review. But if this holds up... She looked at Elena. You understand what happens next? To you? To everyone involved? I do. There's no going back. Elena looked at Webb, at the scar on his chest, at the lives lost, at the truth buried for 2 decades. There was never any going back. 3 days later, the story broke across every major news outlet simultaneously. The Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, the New York Times. International coverage followed within hours. Pentagon cover-up, Operation Phantom Strike, and the murder of American scientists. Secret weapons program. Exposed military-ordered execution of whistleblowers. 20-year conspiracy unraveled by surviving witnesses. Congressional hearings were announced within 24 hours. The Secretary of Defense resigned within 48. Criminal investigations launched within 72. And somewhere in all of it, Elena Vasquez sat in a secure location, protection provided by the FBI after credible threats against her life, and watched the truth finally come to light. Dr. Sarah Chen called on the fourth day. "You're all over the news." "I know." Cole gave a statement, said he witnessed your actions in the OR, said you saved a man's life using skills that no ordinary nurse would possess, said he owes you an apology. Eleanor closed her eyes. "Tell him thank you. Tell him yourself. He's requesting you be brought on as a surgical consultant. Trauma specialization. Says the hospital needs someone with your experience." "I'm not sure Elena," Chen's voice was soft. "You spent 20 years hiding who you are. You saved lives while pretending to be less than you were. Don't you think it's time to stop pretending?" Long silence. "I'll think about it." 2 weeks later, St. Michael's Trauma Center. Elena walked through the main entrance at 7 a.m. She wore scrubs, her hospital badge. Everything looked the same as it had for 14 years, but everything was different. Staff members nodded as she passed, not the dismissive acknowledgement of a night shift nurse. Something else. Something that looked almost like respect. She found Dr. Cole in the surgical wing. He looked older, tired. The arrogance that had defined him seemed diminished somehow, not broken, but tempered. "Dr. Cole," he turned. "Vasquez, or should I say, Chief Petty Officer Vasquez. Elena is fine." "Elena," he took a breath. "I owe you an apology. I said things that were... You didn't know. That's not an excuse. You tried to tell me something was wrong with that patient, and I dismissed you because I assumed I knew better. I almost let him die because of my ego." He extended his hand. "I'm sorry. Truly." Elena took it. Apology accepted. The board approved the consultant position, trauma surgical support. You'd work directly with the surgical team, using your field medicine experience to improve our emergency protocols. He paused. "It's not a lot, but it's a start." Elena looked around the surgical wing, the place where she'd spent 14 years being invisible, the place where she'd hidden from everything she'd been. It's more than a start. The new trauma wing at St. Michael's opened with a small ceremony 6 months later. Nothing elaborate, just staff and administrators and a few local news cameras. Dr. Elena Vasquez, newly certified physician's assistant with surgical specialization, cut the ribbon. Behind her, a plaque bore the name of the wing, the Phantom Strike Memorial Trauma Center. Dedicated to the men and women who served in silence and those who found the courage to speak. Marcus Webb stood in the crowd. His recovery had been slow but steady. He'd testified before Congress twice, written a book, started a foundation for veterans who had witnessed classified misconduct. He caught Elena's eye and nodded. She nodded back. "Doctor." Cole approached after the ceremony. "The new residents are terrified of you, you know." "Good. Fear builds character." "And the new protocols you implemented? The field triage techniques? They've already saved 3 lives this month. 3 patients who would have died under our old system." Eleanor looked at the trauma wing, at the staff moving with purpose, at the patients who would receive care they couldn't get anywhere else. It's what they deserved, the ones who didn't make it, the ones who died so the truth could stay buried. She turned to Cole. "Every life we save here is their legacy. Every patient who walks out of this hospital is proof that their deaths weren't meaningless." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You really believe that?" "I have to." Eleanor looked at the plaque. at the names engraved beneath it, at the mission statement she'd written herself. No one invisible, no one forgotten, no one left behind. Because if I don't, then none of this matters, and I can't live in a world where none of this matters. The trauma bay doors opened. A gurney rushed through. Paramedics shouting vitals. Blood on the floor. Another life hanging in the balance. Elena moved, her hands steady, her purpose clear. 20 years of hiding were over, and the real work was just beginning.